We made a new home, but we have to fight to hold it.
Melee-focused action games have spent years enacting the fantasy of engaging in armed combat, fortunately sparing us the hours of rigorous training and resolve it takes to actually do so in real life. But For Honor, Ubisoft's third-person weapon-based fighter, is different from other melee-focused action games. Its combat system is simple on the surface, but executing its more advanced tactics requires a patient mind, as well as an understanding of its deliberate pacing. There's not many games quite like For Honor. It's an incredibly entertaining fighter that's satisfying both online and off, even despite the narrative flaws of its story mode. Its fantasy medieval world is populated by three of history's most iconic warrior classes: Knights, Vikings, and Samurai. Regardless of which faction you choose to play as, For Honor challenges you to restrain yourself and uphold self-control in the face of strenuous conflict. The elegance of its combat is at times awe-inspiring, easily pulling you into the euphoric highs of a well-deserved victory, where your patience was maintained and your reflexes were on point. While For Honor's combat is simple enough to be accessible to beginners, its deep mechanics allow frequent fighters to noticeably develop their skills in meaningful ways. It's only then that each hero's strengths and weaknesses are fully revealed. For example, the spear-wielding Nobushi offers a wealth of slow, long-range attacks, which when put up against the Berserker's swift axe strikes, transforms the battle into a calculated struggle of space management and precision striking. For Honor's combat encourages adaptive thinking, providing substantial depth and balance in its moment-to-moment action and myriad matchups. At times, putting what you learn into practice is a test of patience, whether you're playing online or off. Fights are slow and measured, demanding you diligently carve out openings through subtle, calculated movements, rather than through brute force or button mashing. The pace of combat in its initial stages seems clunky and disorienting, especially if you're used to faster-paced fighting games. But once you've grown accustomed to its tempo, it's the most enjoyable and fulfilling quality For Honor has to offer. Aside from a few informational videos, For Honor's most useful training tool is its single-player story mode. It functions as a long-form tutorial, putting you into various story-driven scenarios that teach you the fundamentals of combat. Unfortunately, the narrative that links these scenarios together is a nonsensical mess. A warlord named Apollyon, whose intention is to ensure an eternal age of all-out war, instigates the conflict gripping its world. But her motivation is so unclear and muddled that she rarely makes for an entertaining presence. Meanwhile, the battle-hungry ensemble cast tasked with either standing up to or supporting her are marred by a lackluster characterization, as they provide little in the way of relatability. When you tackle For Honor's multiplayer, there are plenty of modes to dive into. However, the most varied and entertaining of the bunch is Dominion, a 4v4 mode where you and your team cooperate to capture and hold 3 zones in a battlefield with AI minions. Rushing from point to point, defending a zone, or working with your teammates to obtain others is exhilarating. Combat in this mode can become too chaotic at times, which often causes you and your teammates to mindlessly button mash your way to victory against the last standing hero. Despite this, Dominion encapsulates the sensation of a large-scale medieval battle on a smaller scale, distilling the desperation of a relentless charge and the ruthless sword fights that ensue in its wake. Elimination mode, meanwhile, emphasizes and amplifies the complexity of For Honor's team-based duels. It's uncomplicated in premise, a 4v4 face-off to the death with no respawns. Combat is thrilling and challenging in this mode, especially when it's up to you to secure a victory against a full enemy squad. You come to understand not only how to fight against multiple foes, but also how to judge when and where it's appropriate to do so. Learning this is at times punishing or unfair, but when your reflexes and awareness work in your favor, it's difficult not to feel an overwhelming satisfaction in how the game makes it possible to win against all odds. If Dominion demonstrates For Honor's capacity to create varied and exciting moments, Elimination embodies the thrill and depth of its team-based fights, then Duel showcases combat at its most tense and absolute. This strictly one-on-one battle mode forces you to rely on the strength of your hero's base moveset. Duel's stripped-down nature showcases the brilliance of For Honor's one-on-one combat, elevating its other modes in the process through how it condenses what each has to offer into a raw and brief competitive instance. After slaying countless foes, it's clear the impact For Honor's combat has had. Its fundamental tenets of discipline and restraint are bestowed upon you permanently, forever changing the way you perceive a melee combat encounter in a game. In its highest moments, it's difficult to put down. Its slow-paced combat and narrative shortcomings might turn off those unwilling to take the time to dive deep into what it has to offer. However, make no mistake, those who do will be rewarded with some of the most satisfying multiplayer melee fighting conceived in recent years.